and to provide appropriate formulations and prepare for appropriate international circumstances to handle the great difficult problems which confront mankind. I should like also to express our thanks and appreciation to the people, government and the heads of both governments of Canada and British Columbia for hosting this conference in their beautiful country, for their excellent efforts enabling the success of this significant international conference. Gentlemen, the progressive international forces aspire to realize freedom and happiness for mankind. These are the forces which reject and combat all varieties of imperialism, colonialism, and their manifestations. These are the forces which combat racism and oppression wherever they may be. We in Iraq, confronted at the commencement of our revolution in July '68, we have confronted two types of challenges which delayed the progress of our people. The first challenge was external political, economic, cultural, and military attempts aimed at undermining our political and economic independence and consequently weakening our contribution to the welfare of our Arab nation and in particular in human society in general. The second type of challenge was internal, which was the result of accumulated political, social, and economic problems inherited from the periods of ancient and modern imperialism and oppression. These constituted a barrier against modern development. We worked seriously and energetically to confront these challenges and to remove these barriers. We worked diligently to realize the best option to implement progress and the desired evolution. Now, 8 years after the birth of the revolution, we are achieving steadily our economic independence by attaining complete control over our natural wealth and resources, and particularly oil, and utilizing our resources for the construction of a just, democratic, and progressive society. We linked our Arab liberation with the liberation of the world. The link is one of destiny. We defined with clarity our position and stand on imperialism and racism, and we have worked to support materially and morally the struggle of people to attain their freedom and independence. The government of Iraq is working energetically to construct a progressive Iraqi society capable of discharging its human message. Accordingly, the question of human settlements is a basic component of its national development plans, equally for both urban and rural development. We have made significant progress in this regard. However, we are aware that our future tasks are greater and more serious in affecting the future of our people. While convening here today to consult over the solutions to one of the most important problems confronting mankind, there are millions of refugees who are suffering the bitterness and homelessness caused by aggression and racism of minority, alien settlers who supplanted the national populations. Our Palestinian Arab people are still suffering forcible exile caused by the Zionist racist entity which demolished and continues to demolish Palestinian homes and settlements, expel the Palestinians from their homes, and usurp their natural national legal right. We are convened to attempt to devise means of constructing happy human settlements. We see no advantage in the presence of such entities that have been built on the ruins of other people, on the usurpation of their national rights, and which have been built on aggression. We see no advantage in the presence of such entities at our international conferences, but on the contrary, the correct path is to expel and isolate such entities. We deem it necessary that this international conference should condemn all forms of colonialism and Zionist racist occupation of Arab lands, construction of Zionist settlements in occupied Arab areas, destruction of Arab houses and villages, and expulsion of its inhabitants. Iraq believes in establishing political, economic, social, and cultural relations on a mutual and equal basis with all states, irrespective of the form of the government. But we refuse to recognize or cooperate with any entity based on racist aggression. Accordingly, Iraq is prepared to assist in any way to make this conference a success. We are hopeful that the resolutions and recommendations shall guide us in confronting the problems of human settlements in our homelands and international spheres. We wish you success in your efforts and peace be upon you. Signed, Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr, President, Republic of Iraq. Mr. President, the problem of providing suitable human settlements for human beings is considered by us as one of the major challenges facing humanity in our modern world. And the dangers of this problem are increasing and getting more complex day after day. Moreover, the task of human settlement has an international scope and requires the efforts of all the developed and developing countries, as well as continuous international cooperation in order to eliminate the miserable conditions under which the vast majority of human beings are still living. Iraq feels that the basic solution for these important problems lies in reviewing the contemporary international economic order, which is aligned towards the interests of industrialized countries, and assisting the developing countries to achieve reasonable economic growth. And all the other problems, important as may be, will not be solved radically except through this basic element. Balanced economic growth that aims at closing the widening gap between the developed and developing countries, and which aims at a just distribution of the global wealth upon its people, is the best way to be followed by the international community. It is the path to peace and happiness for all mankind. The first problem, consequently, that must get the conference attention is pressing the developed countries to fulfill their international commitments concerning giving different forms of aid, as stated in the various resolutions of the United Nations and UN conferences of trade and development. The UNCTAD, requiring assistance to developing countries in executing their plans for development and achieving progress as soon as possible, and stopping the depletion of the limited of natural resources and their extravagant consumption, as well as stopping their utilization of trade barriers and exporting economic crisis to developing countries. Iraq, although it is a developing country, is playing its role in this in a very effective manner, whether through the Arab international organizations or through bilateral aid given to developing countries. This is due to our belief that giving the process of development in the third world in a quick and balanced manner will inevitably lead to closer human cooperation and will achieve permanent peace and happiness for human beings wherever they are. Mr. President, at the end of World War II, the population of Iraq was about 3.5 million people, of which 75% lived in rural areas. Today, the population of Iraq has reached about 12 million, and those living in rural areas has been reduced to 35%. This points out to two important phenomena in the development of the Iraqi population. The first is an annual population growth in excess of 3%. The second is the rapid growth of the urban population as a result of the large migration from the rural areas to the city. These two phenomena, in the absence of sound planning for a period of time, caused a spontaneous expansion in the urban centers and incompatible with its economic capabilities. They also caused shrinking in the number of villages and the desertion of large areas of Iraqi agricultural lands. Furthermore, they led to a big problem in providing suitable housing for city dwellers. Subsequently, housing problems, which were accumulated through many years, became one of the principal problems in the country. Since the 17th of July 1968 revolution, the Iraqi government has intensified its endeavors in placing the housing sector in a proper position in our plans of national development. We have laid down a plan for all the main cities of Iraq, and we are carrying out policies for rural housing. At the same time, the setting up of complexes with the assistance of the government, and particularly in rural areas, which leads at bringing together the peasants living in modern and convenient settlements. The industrialized places, also near the industrialized centers, are being considered. The Iraqi government has also attended to the problem of housing the Bedouins in special complexes in preparation for their gradual transfer to modern living. The settlement sector, in its comprehensive meaning, has become a part of the national development planning. However, the main difficulty facing the settlement problem in Iraq is a shortage in national technical experience and the shortage of international technical assistance in these fields. It is quite often the monopoly over expertise by the institutions of the developed countries that make it even more difficult to solve the problems of human settlements and raise its cost to very high figures. There is no doubt that other developing countries are faced with similar problems. Therefore, we support voluntary international cooperation for the sake of the betterment of mankind in this universe. We are sure that human solidarity in encountering the difficulties facing it is a more appropriate method and a better solution. Mr. President, I would like now to have the capsule, please.
A new life for the countryside. Rural settlement in Iraq. Landscape in Iraq varies considerably.
أن أرض العراق تختلف كثيرا، ولكن الزراعة كانت دائما مصدرا للثروة في كل أجزاء العراق حتى بعد ظهور
Time when feudal landlords owned vast lands and exploited farmers to suit their own interests. A farmer's big family would live in one small mud hut, from which they wanted finally to escape, as from a prison. The revolutionary government put an end to that. The land was taken from the feudal lords and distributed to the farmers. Dams and extensive drainage projects have been built. A whole new concept of the village is coming into being. The planners of the Rural Settlement Administration in Baghdad are at work. Villages are rebuilt on new sites, each no more than 10 kilometers away from a highway. A new community settlement is ready for occupation where, in human terms, decent housing assumes priority. Enough space for a family provided with all the facilities and with electricity and running water, all where in the past there was nothing of the kind. The farmers can keep their own flocks and cattle. Their homes are now better built, more comfortable than ever before. Trained social workers pay regular visits to the farmers' families to study their conditions and offer help and advice. For the children, there is a well-equipped recreation center. The new village has its own services. It has its own school, its own dispensary. Happy, well-settled farmers are attached to their land, where they become part of a community life which gives them a sense of belonging and self-fulfillment.
Mr. President, finally, I would like to express my thanks and appreciation to all those involved in the affairs of this conference, particularly the General Committee, the Bureau, the interpreters and Secretariat staff. I would also like to express the thanks and appreciation to the Iraqi delegation, to the Canadian government and its friendly people for hosting the cordial treatment of this important conference. Thank you.
I wish to thank
أشكر
the Republic of Iraq and thank him for his good wishes to the Secretariat and all others involved, including the host government. Perhaps others, now that that has been said, may wish to devote their full time to their presentations, and we, without being presumptuous, assume that the good wishes apply from everyone, unless we're told otherwise. I now give the floor to the head of the delegation of Poland, His Excellency Ambassador Joseph Czezak.
which was most destroyed during the war. 800,000 dead, the city ruined in 85%. Rebuilt and growing as never before. On the example of Warsaw, the capital of People's Poland, we in this film would like to present the principles of spatial planning, the reconstruction, development and life of the city.
Preceded me in expressing their appreciation for the positively comprehensive and informative document, here struck, conf 70/5.
Housing is grouped in separate districts and housing estates.
Which I'm sure will greatly facilitate our deliberations. Turning specifically for the question before us, I would like to comment on paragraph 23 and a number of other related recommendations. These comments arise out of a unique situation applying in Fiji, but I'm sure similar situations...
The system of open spaces is the basic element in shaping the urban environment and recreational facilities, and they run through the whole city.
In the public interest, I fully agree with the sentiments reflected in paragraphs 24 to 26. However, on the question of public ownership, we have certain reservations about agreeing.
The Warsaw transport system ensures the city's connection with the country and the region, and also between the districts.
Ownership system whereby land is held communally, but a large proportion of such land is made available for all types of socio-economic development. This land is not alienated.
The city center plays a unique role in the city. There are the central authorities, national monuments and institutions of higher learning.
We sincerely hope that the distinguished delegates and the drafting committee will recognize this unique situation.
A new center is being built here.
And will amend Section D on land to make this acceptable to our delegation.
Here are completely rebuilt from war ruins the historical areas where foreign tourists meet the city dwellers, the old, the young and the very young.
Paragraph 23, second sentence to stop at the word asset and delete the remainder of that sentence. Paragraph 25, delete the boundaries of in the third line.
Begun my statement with some pictures showing the recent history of Warsaw, the history of its destruction and reconstruction. The destruction and reconstruction of Poland can be easily illustrated by the development of the city of Warsaw itself. Since the problems which we faced, planning and coordination methods were and are being applied throughout the country. Mr. President, it is my duty and honor to state on behalf of our delegation that Poland attaches very great importance to this conference because many of its ideas are our own. Furthermore, over the last 30 years, we have tried to put these ideas into practice. It is on the basis of conviction and consideration, then, that we support the general ideas contained in the conference document. The task facing the world today in terms of housing are immense. Let us hope that here in this beautiful city of Vancouver, we will be able to deliberate and seek together solutions to this great problem, and that itself is unprecedented in the history of mankind. We in Poland are very much aware of the difficulties and complexity of this task. We are ready to work in order to solve this task with determination for the good of humanity and peace, and we are ready to exchange our experience and to learn from others. I think many of our difficult experiences and achievements in Poland may be of interest, particularly to countries which are at the initial and difficult phase of economic development and urbanization. After the Second World War, our industry was destroyed. More than 60% of the buildings in towns and the countryside were reduced to rubble and ashes, and as well as the bulk of the infrastructure. We did not have skilled personnel because most of them had perished in the fight against the enemy or in concentration camps. We were faced with an overpopulated countryside and a high level of migration of the rural population to the towns. Nevertheless, we had to create and improve housing conditions for the whole people. We had to create new systems of technical infrastructure and develop a network of social services. We had to restore historical monuments, testimony of the culture of our people, which had been deliberately destroyed by the Nazi occupier. These were immense tasks. If we look back and see Poland and Warsaw today developed and reconstructed, we may claim that these achievements were made possible by a people's regime and the determined policy of the Polish United Workers' Party, as well as the commitment of the whole nation. In these great tasks facing our conference, international cooperation is vitally necessary. The reconstruction of Warsaw and the assistance which the Soviet Union has given us is living proof of this. Beginning the work of reconstruction and development, we at the same time undertook the necessary work for the establishment of a system of planned economy and a national policy of urbanization and human establishments. Without going into detail, I would nevertheless like to stress that our policy of urbanization and housing is based on general socio-political goals for the development of the country and is based upon the principle of equality of law and rights and duties of all citizens. This has been reflected in a harmonious deployment of the population, the development of all regions, and by the development of services. The standard of housing, as well as social services programs and other programs, are dynamic in character and are subject to evolutionary changes parallel to the economic development of the country. The fact that, first of all, we had to restore and develop our industrial potential made it necessary for us to exercise control over the program of housing construction and to maintain a balance in the light of our economic resources and high priority investments. That is why, although the situation with regard to housing in Warsaw and other Polish cities is twice as good today as it was before the Second World War, we feel there is still a great deal to be done. In the last few years, we have had to change our forms and methods of construction and have involved the whole population in direct participation. Pursuant to recent decisions, the number of housing units in 1990 will be doubled as compared with 1970. The reconstruction of Warsaw is an example of a social housing policy, of socio-cultural centers, and housing egalitarianism. The reconstruction of all the ruined historical monuments of architecture and national culture is exemplary. Mr. President, I'd like to state that in the view of many people, Warsaw has become the symbol of the struggle for liberty and peace. Its reconstruction is proof of its faith in the need for and the possibility of maintaining peace and of promoting broad international cooperation, an indispensable condition for the development of cities and the countryside throughout the world. With regard to towns and other human settlements, man who devastates them by war represents a much greater danger than the forces of nature, however destructive they may be. That is why our conference, devoted as it is to questions of housing, human settlements, should at the same time be a conference of international cooperation and should provide us with an approach to world peace. We would like to thank the Government of Canada and the City of Vancouver for the excellent working conditions they have provided for us. Thank you, sir.
I thank the distinguished head of the delegation of Poland, and now call upon the next speaker, the Secretary of State for the Environment of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, the Right Honourable Peter Shore, who I invite to the podium.
Mr. President, we're here in this most pleasing city of Vancouver to share our practical experiences and to learn from each other. That is the essence of international cooperation and a prerequisite of effective action. I've learned a great deal from the statements of the countries which have preceded me, and even more from the visits I have made to many of the great cities of the developing world in recent years. The United Kingdom has much to teach too, for we have been dealing with the problems of urbanization longer than any other country in the world. And may I say that I represent in Parliament a part of London's East End which has suffered more than most from the process of uncontrolled urbanization. The industrialization of the UK began more than 2 centuries ago. For many years, London was the largest city in the world, and in the last century, cities like Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham, and Glasgow experienced an explosion in their populations as dramatic then as those of the fastest growing cities in the world today. This explosion coincided with great increases in the wealth of the nation, but at a cost of human deprivation, poverty, and squalor on a vast scale. In our cities, 100 years ago, infectious diseases such as cholera and tuberculosis, malnutrition, and the degrading social effects of deprivation were all too common. Results of urbanization on this scale forced us to take public action on water supply, sewage disposal, and slum clearance, to enact laws to regulate working conditions, to improve education, and to meet other social needs. The public conscience was awakened, and we began the long process leading to major reform. The great decision to plan comprehensively for town and country was taken in the aftermath of the Second World War. And this included the planning of industrial locations, a crucial factor in controlling the growth of cities. Our planning system is just 30 years old, but in those 30 years, we've learned a great deal. We've learned that planning must be concerned with the total environment, with all aspects of living. The planning of our physical surroundings must be related both to economic activities that give work to people and, of course, to their wider social needs. We've learned not to concentrate too much on some aspects of planning at the expense of others. Let me give 2 examples. Our policies to achieve dispersal from our inner cities through the establishment of new and expanded towns have been very successful. We're proud of them. But in pursuing these policies, we should have thought harder about the needs of those who remain in the inner city area. In this respect, we differ from our colleagues in the developing world. Our inner city problem is no longer overpopulation, but unbalanced depopulation. And that can be almost as disturbing as overcrowding. We found, too, that the policy of building tower blocks, streets in the air, for family living, may help to achieve more dwellings more quickly, but such a policy neglects to take account of all the other factors that turn a collection of dwellings into homes and communities. Another lesson we have learned is the importance of maintaining control on industrial location. This is one of the keys to controlling the growth of cities. Indeed, we've managed through our industrial location and green belt policies to contain and to reduce the size of our own capital city. We now know how thin the line is between comprehensive planning that can sustain and nurture a community and comprehensive redevelopment with sweeping changes which can suffocate and destroy. Comprehensive planning has produced many triumphs in the UK, and not least in the new town. But comprehensive redevelopment has led, in established urban areas, to the demolition not just of streets, but of whole communities. We've learnt that our planning of areas must involve realistic timescales. Of course, it's the essence of rational development that forward planning should take place. But the price paid for that by people today must not be too high. And it is too high in terms of personal suffering and anxiety and of the discouragement of investment. When plans are drawn, areas zoned or road lines safeguarded, not on a firm probability of development, but on a distant possibility that may never occur. Above all, we have learned that our success and our mistakes are ultimately measured in terms of the quality of life of our community. These lessons have led us to a number of new approaches. First, we are placing a strong new emphasis on public participation as an integral, not incidental part of the planning process. Democracy means working with and for people. We want our new system of planning to be more dynamic, more responsive to changing circumstances and to people's needs. Second, we are pensioning off the bulldozer. We are replacing the general policy of comprehensive redevelopment involving clearance and sterilization of large tracts of our cities by a policy of gradual renewal and rehabilitation, so making better use of what we already have without destroying the community we are seeking to help. Third, we are determined henceforth to build on a human scale. High-rise dwellings are right for some people in some areas, but I do not want to see any more massive schemes of high-rise blocks of family dwellings. Even in the inner city area, they create more problems than they solve. Fourth, we are taking building land into public ownership. This, we have decided, is the best way to ensure successful planning and that the community fully benefits from the developments that flow from planning decisions. I think here we have anticipated the mood of a number of the conference papers, and I'm glad to say that the United Kingdom has now got a Community Land Act to do just that. Fifth, we decided that the problems of our inner city areas must be tackled with renewed vigor. The rapid depopulation of our inner cities cannot continue indefinitely. We're urgently considering what policy changes are necessary to breathe new life into these areas. Finally, let me say something of the spirit in which we approach these tasks. We believe that we have sufficient talent, experience, imagination, public support, and political will to make and remake our towns and cities in a way which will enhance the standard and quality of life of all our citizens. Such, Mr. President, are the main elements in the approach and experience of the United Kingdom. The difficulties and problems with which my country has to deal are still considerable. But I recognize, of course, that they do not compare with those that already exist elsewhere, and still less with those which, as earlier speakers warned us, will yet emerge in the developing world if a major effort to change present trends is not made. This conference gives us a chance to focus not only on the problems, the staggering problems of the city and of the countryside. We are trying to move towards solutions nationally, and we believe that aid programs can contribute internationally to the same ends. My government decided just under a year ago to direct more of our bilateral aid to the poorest countries, and within these programs to ensure that most of that aid is of direct benefit to those who need it most. If urbanization in developing countries is to be controlled, it is important to slow down the flow of people into already overcrowded cities. The majority of the poor in the third world live in rural areas, and our major priority now is rural development, to help the rural poor, both economically and socially. But of course, we also want to support any measures to help the urban poor and to alleviate the growing problems of unemployment and underemployment in the towns. It's also our aim to work for similar objectives in the multilateral field, and that's why we warmly welcome the World Bank's commitment. It's also why we attach particular importance at the conference to improving the machinery of international cooperation aimed at helping the poorer countries to deal with their settlement problems. Mr. President, I hope that at this conference we will be purposeful and realistic. We can and should help each other, and not only in the vital area of human settlements, but we as political leaders have to make sure that the political will is there in our own countries to improve the conditions of life of our people. Thank you. Capsule, please.
Habitat UK 76 examines our changing concepts of town planning in Britain since the war. 30 short years, but a period of rapid and dramatic change. We have found the need to stand back to assess achievement and to alter course when necessary. In the 1940s, many of our city centres were too small for the populations they served. Sprawling urban development gobbled up the countryside, and acres of slum housing were in urgent need of renewal in inner city areas. We have tried knocking down and rebuilding to provide a new city centre with an elaborate road system. Bold and attractive though this may often seem, does it work for everybody? Do the roads attract more traffic to feed new traffic jams? And what about the long-term blight caused when the resources have not proved sufficient for speedy completion? Although some new roads have to be built, it makes sense to manage effectively the roads we have. It is better value for money and less socially disruptive. Here, people and not cars have the freedom of the surface. Here, people matter most. The high-rise block seemed a bold, inspired, and very positive solution to the problems of providing modern housing for inner city dwellers. Towers in a park, but the reality, low-cost lifts, anonymity, and isolation. A lack of caring when the place belongs to everybody and to nobody. High density does not have to mean high rise or a massive scale. There is less stress here. Traditional building forms give a sense of stability in a changing world. Now that our worst slums have been cleared, we are improving our older property, only redeveloping when our buildings are near the end of their useful life and on a gradual scale. This way, we avoid the wholesale uprooting of communities, and it makes economic sense to make the best use of what we have already. So what have we learned in the course of the last 30 years? We have learned that the big single sweeping solution is not necessarily the best solution. We have found that a package of smaller solutions allows for a greater capacity to adapt. We have learned above all the importance of preserving the human scale. And as we build for tomorrow, we aim to discover and reflect the real needs and wishes of our people.
I thank the Secretary of State for the environment of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And I now give the floor to the Minister of the Interior of Israel, His Excellency Dr. Joseph Borg.
Mr. President, the delegation of Israel comes to this conference in order to listen and to learn and to share experiences, problems and solutions in this partnership of trial, error and endeavor that is a history of man and man. Treat the Habitat Conference as an important that which unites humanity to help the underprivileged and developing nations and those distressed strata of life that exist within every state and nation. But this conference should not repeat here on the east coast of the Pacific some of the mistakes committed in international meeting places at the west coast of the Atlantic by getting involved in extraneous political disputes which it cannot resolve, and of the real subject matter of Mr. President, I would your ruling, the ruling of the here before. That free democratic elections in the administered areas and in the old frontiers of Israel. As usual with elections, you are not always satisfied with the results. But anyhow, the mere fact that we could have free democratic elections stands. And I challenge many of the critics that spoke here. I invite them to come and to have a look by themselves. More than this, I would like to say, listening to certain protagonists and non-uncertain antagonists, I would like to advise to adopt a low tone and tune for certain political remarks. Here we are at Habitat, and in the country of our northern neighbor, the northern neighbor of Israel, there is going on a process that is not far from genocide, a process that until today brought more victims than all the wars since the proclamation of the State of Israel. Mr. President, I would like to come to the issue, and I would be happy if everyone would talk about the real topic of this conference. In establishing its national objectives, the State of Israel defines the political goal of keeping its democratic way of life and the social goal of integration and cohesion, while at the same time striving to achieve economic growth and development of the land. The linchpin in Israel's settlement and development policies has been and is public control of land. 91% of all land is publicly owned. Moreover, all land development falls under the authority of national planning laws. Preparation of new lands for active use is a function of a national land authority. Development of land, as we know, raises its value and is subject to a capital gains tax. And it is this way it is ensured that a good part of the windfall profits of development booms is returned to the national exchequer for the benefit of society as a whole. These goals have led to the establishment of a large-scale government housing program. The Ministry of Housing sponsors 60% of housing starts in Israel on a regional basis, sometimes 100% in development and desert areas, going down to a very low percentage in the coastal megalopolis. Much of this housing is available at low cost to Israel's least advantaged groups, large families living in overcrowded conditions, newly married couples, and immigrants. The effects of these policies have been the development of a variety of settlement patterns so that every citizen can freely choose the organizational and social framework in which he wishes to live. I should like to present to you the types of rural settlement which have been developed in Israel and which, in many respects, are unique. They reflect the basic social and human goals of rural developments in Israel. Most of the Israeli settlements are either kibbutzim, communal settlements, or moshavim, cooperative settlements. In both cases, land and equipment are publicly owned. Distribution is well organized to regional and national networks, while production is carried out on a family unit base in the cooperative settlements or by all the members in a communal settlement. The economic policies are founded on the principles of self-employment and sharing of income. In the last few years, the kibbutzim in particular have embarked on a new stage in their evolution by adding industrial manufacturing to the agricultural base and thus developing a novel synthesis of town and country living. The strong ideological and social motivation, the communal and cooperative spirit, the full participation of each member in the government of his settlement, the total involvement in the creation of new lifestyles, the strong national commitment to the establishment and initial support for the rural settlements, all these factors are responsible for the role of rural development in Israel as a major vehicle in the nation building and economic development of the country. The large number of immigrants and refugees who had to be absorbed in a short period of time and the scarcity of physical resources, mainly water, required the establishment of an urban component within the national development process. This has been carried out by elaborating and implementing a national settlement policy. This is formalized in a plan which identifies for each settlement in Israel its designated population size at a future date of about 25 years hence. The plan is revised periodically, and this plan is a starting point for resource allocation in housing, infrastructure, and investments in economic activities. The plan has to fulfill two major national objectives. First, avoidance of excessive concentration of population in one region, by implementing a strong decentralization policy designed to settle all parts of the country. 2, preventing the indiscriminate transfer of agricultural land to urban users by means of a strict land use policy. The main vehicle of the implementation of the national settlement policy is the establishment of new towns. About 30 new towns have been established since 1950, in which almost 20% of Israel's population now lives. The new towns are the main centers for the absorption of new citizens. Their main economic bases are resources utilization, manufacturing activities, and service centers for the rural areas around them. The national settlement policy provides the overall direction for regional and local planning in Israel, thus establishing a hierarchical framework for settlement planning in the country. Mr. President, in the short period of its existence as an independent state, Israel has had to come to grips with a number of major human settlement problems in the world and has shown that they can be solved. Neglected land can be revitalized. The desert frontier can be pushed back. People who have suffered the degradation of prejudice and persecution can regain their human dignity. Technological backward societies can learn to use modern agricultural and industrial production techniques. A national settlement policy can be implemented. Rural settlements can achieve a high standard of living as such as their urban counterparts. New towns can become flourishing, independent settlements and people can be encouraged to change their place of living to face the challenges of settling in remote, underdeveloped areas. This record of Israel's settlements confirms the Dubrovnik habitat analysis. Settlements are the reflection of societies, and may I add, societies reflect the quality of their settlements. I hope that this conference will succeed in establishing an appropriate instrument to implement the principles and plans developed here. The ultimate aims of the habitat endeavors are clear. The methods to reach them vary from country to country. As it was said, is not a linear process. The point of departure is always different, and the target can only be reached by the all-embracing synthesis of national effort and international cooperation. Israel will play an active role in this endeavor, translating into modern terms and into modern times the eternal saying of the prophet Isaiah, Uvanu vatim v'yashavu, v'nateu chiramim v'achelu piryam, and they shall build houses and inhabit them, and they shall plant vineyards and eat the fruit of them. Capsule on water.
There is water in Israel, but not enough. The water that does exist here, however, is used in the wisest and most efficient way. In the Negev, Israel's southern region, there is very little water. If, however, water can be supplied to this area, it will have the potential of being the country's most productive agricultural region. Israel's largest river is the Jordan. It flows into the Sea of Galilee, which is the largest reservoir for the national water carrier.
Today, this system carries water to most parts of the country. The pumping station of the carrier is an underground complex of giant chambers where electricity is used for pumping water. Open canals wind through relatively level terrain to carry the water into operative reservoirs. Smaller regional and local water projects, including thousands of wells, have been incorporated into the carrier to form a fully controlled statewide water grid. Automated irrigation is used for many of Israel's agricultural industries, especially in areas where there is a manpower shortage. Drip irrigation supplies water to the plants, one drop at a time. This method is highly suited in areas where saline water is used for the irrigation of protected crops. Because all of the available water is being used, Israel has also embarked on sewage treatment and reuse. This purification process has added significantly to available sources. Industries also use reclaimed water, water that once found its way into the sea. Today, it flows through pipes and is used over and over again. Desalinated water is another solution to the problem. Because of plants like this one, the Red Sea provides all of the drinking water for the town of Eilat. These farmers are engaged in their daily endeavor to make the soil fruitful. Water is the link between their toil and the harvested crop. Water that must be used sparingly, under conditions where every drop counts.
I wish to thank the distinguished Minister of the Interior for the State of Israel. And the next speaker is the Minister of Housing and Town Planning of Chile, His Excellency Mr. Carlos Granifo. I give him the floor.
Señor Presidente.
Mr. President, our small country on the southern tip of South America is present with a small delegation headed by myself, Minister for Housing and Urban Affairs, to bear witness to the importance which we attach to this Conference on Human Settlements and to accept the invitation extended by Canada as host country for this international gathering, and to contribute with a small atom to habitat, the habitat which is to be erected over our planet and the foundations of which are being created today at this conference. Habitat can no longer be postponed. Man, the human species, without abandoning their singular destiny or individuality, seek progress in human associations, and the product shown today is the city with its vices and virtues. The fields are the work of God, but the city is the work of man. When verdant pastures covered the planet, man had not yet appeared. In underdeveloped countries such as ours, urban planning has been overcome by the lines of least resistance, and a disarray of poverty becomes rampant. Thus it is proved to the world that there is no habitat as yet for all the inhabitants on earth. Slums, squatter settlements, shanty towns, marginal populations in America constitute the challenge we must overcome. We are convinced that as man in isolation cannot flourish, so small societies require more integration. The physical world is so mingled, so interlinked, that scientists seek structural and immutable laws for it. We believe that societies are working toward greater humanization. And habitat must give the general basic rules which will make possible the singular and universal coexistence of all the families of the planet with their unique traditions, cultures, and economic possibilities. My country is present because we believe that Habitat will be one of the most far-reaching initiatives of the United Nations. We were present when this conference was being prepared at all the meetings held in New York, Caracas, and Geneva. We appreciate the magnitude of the growing problem so clearly stated by the Honorable Barnett Danson, the Minister for Urban Affairs of Canada and now our President, when, in January last, he showed us how the developing countries would in the next 25 years have to build 3 to 4 times more housing than now exists. What do the developing countries expect from this conference? We believe that our societies have already entered the functional era, wherein ideas, principles, and institutions are given credence and held in respect only when action is taken. There is so much uncertainty and so many changes in structure throughout the world because the institutions have been added to the forms of the ontological era of an person, where ideas were held to be more valid than deeds or action. Our peoples expect action, reflected in pilot projects on a local and regional scale, such as some of the ones described in the valuable inventory of present action prepared by the various bodies of the United Nations family. The selective guidelines seem to us to be very efficient, covering 6 spheres of action which are sufficiently specific to regulate our debates and recommendations. We hope that in the short time of 15 days, this conference will concentrate on the orientations contained in the documents prepared by the Secretariat without trying to explain here so many problems and situations which would be warranted under the complex item of habitat. In Geneva, we already stated our views on